Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Could everyone hear me? Hello, yeah, you can hear me? Okay, very good. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we come to the final installment in our series about the Israeli leaders and prime ministers, and I think this is the most exciting one of all because it's our current prime minister of Israel. And who doesn't know the very dynamic and controversial figure in Benjamin Netanyahu? And tonight we have the great pleasure of having with us the director of this film to have an in-depth discussion about the prime minister of Israel and his rise to power and his maintaining power for such a long time. So before we get to that, I want to thank Jane and John Shalom for always sponsoring this series. Very generous of them. We're really enjoying this series. And I want to thank Myra for organizing it together with Jane and John. And may God bless you for what you are providing for our community. So I'm going to introduce the guest speaker, the producer of this film, Mr. Dan Shadur, who's with us from Israel. And I'm very grateful for you being up at this late hour of the early morning in Israel, Erev Shabbat. But you look alert and fresh and ready to engage with us. And
Yeah, good morning. I'm happy to be here with you.
thank you, Dan, and
Here,
Shabbat Shalom. And
Shabbat Shalom.
Dan is going to open with maybe 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes of introduction to the film, and then you're welcome to post your questions in the chat box, and I'll present them to him. And we'll look forward to a fascinating discussion. Before I introduce the speaker, I want you to know that Benjamin Netanyahu once visited Palm Beach, spoke at the Palm Beach Synagogue. Not when he was prime minister, in one of his earlier roles. I think he may have been finance minister at the time. I'm not sure. And we had a wonderful reception at one of our members' homes. Rami Weisfish and Panina hosted him in his home, and so we know him on a personal level here in Palm Beach as well. But tonight's film is produced by Dan Shadur, and the name of the film is King Bibi. If you watched the film, and if you didn't, I encourage you to watch it later. The song that's played in the film is instead of David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam, they sing Bibi Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. Bibi, King of Israel, long live King of Israel, Bibi. So I guess that's where the title of the film, King Bibi, came from. But King Bibi explores Benjamin Netanyahu's rise to power, relying solely on archival footage of his media performances over the years. As the film explains, he rarely gives interviews, so it's just going to the media performances from his days as a popular guest expert on American TV, through his public confession of adultery, and his mastery of the art of social media. From one studio to another, Bibi evolved from Israel's great political hope to a controversial figure whom some perceive as Israel's savior, and others as a cynical politician who will stop at nothing to retain his power. So if that doesn't tell you enough about the direction of this film, now you'll hear more directly from the producer, from Dan Schauder. Kavod Gadol, it's an honor to welcome you via Zoom to our community here in Palm Beach. Dan.
Thank you so much for this introduction, Rabbi, and thank you for hosting me. It's always nice to meet new people, even if it's on a digital platform. Yeah, so I'm the director and producer of King Bibi. The idea of making this film came to mind about 5 or 6 years ago. I was actually in the US. I was traveling with my previous film, which is called Before the Revolution. And I started noticing Bibi's appearances in the media, and it intrigued something in me. There was a certain difference between how Bibi appears in Israel in the media and how he seemed to appear in the US. He seemed to be more comfortable in the US media, and it sparked an interest in me. I never voted for Netanyahu, and I hardly knew anyone who voted for him while I was thinking about the film. And yet he kept being re-elected. So this was kind of a mystery that I wanted to solve. And at the time, there was really very few products about Netanyahu. There were two biographies, unauthorized, published in the 90s when he was first elected. And then, although he was already such a prominent figure in our life, there was really not a lot about him. So personally, I mean, politically, I was interested in trying to decipher the secret of his success. And there was something even more basic that attracted me to the story, something about his cinematic qualities. First of all, as someone who always appears on screen and has an impact, even if you don't agree with him. And because his story and his family story is so much rooted in the Zionist and Israeli story, there was something interesting for me in the way his personal story is intertwined in the big political and historical story of Israel. So that was another interesting aspect for me. So I started thinking, how do I make a film about Netanyahu? I was a relatively unknown filmmaker at the time, and Netanyahu, not only that, I mean, at the time he hardly gave any interviews to the Israeli media, so I didn't even think about asking to get an interview from him because I knew I wouldn't get it. So then this is the first question you ask yourself, and the financiers ask you when you come to make a documentary: what is your access? What is your access to the story? And I didn't have any access naturally, but I really wanted to make this film nevertheless. So I started thinking, and at the time there were a few documentaries that were released around the world that were based on archival footage. There was a film about the singer Amy Winehouse. There was a film about the Brazilian race driver Senna. And there was another film, and I'm not making any comparisons, but the film was released at the same time, about the Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. Another film that was based only on archival footage. And when I saw these pieces, I looked at it and I thought, well, Bibi has been around for so long, and as someone who grew up in the 80s and 90s, there are so many memorable performances by him. So perhaps this is the way to do it. This is the way to make this film, and then I'm not dependent on anyone. I can make it. I can control the narrative, and I can gather the material that will make the film. This interested me artistically, and it also interested me politically, because the discourse around Netanyahu is so toxic, and everyone has their opinion, and it's very hard to move them. So I didn't want to bring, now I'm talking about the decision to make it, not to interview anyone in this film. I didn't want to bring the same opinions about, yes, I hate Netanyahu, I love Netanyahu. I wanted to let the footage speak for itself. So I decided that this will be the way to make this film. Not interviewing anyone, gathering a lot of footage, and presenting this narrative as is. And then all I needed to do is convince the broadcasters in Israel to finance this project. And this wasn't easy at the beginning. Some people came, when I came to them with the idea, they said, we see Netanyahu all the time. Why would we want to watch him for 90 minutes? So this took some convincing, which we did. We did manage to get support for the film, and then started a very long process of making the film. First of all, finding the archives. I had a feeling while thinking about the film before I started working, that there will be some interesting footage from the time before Netanyahu became the Netanyahu we know. I was hoping that there will be some hints in the history of his footage that will bring us something a little bit different about Netanyahu. Also because he became such a professional politician with such a control on the media, both in his appearance and in his politics and his cunning, that today he controls every image that gets out. He has like total control on these images. And I was thinking, I'm sorry, you might be hearing the baby in the background. I was wondering, how did it look before he became Netanyahu, before he became such a professional speaker? And luckily, I found some footage of this nature, especially one piece of archival footage, his first news appearance in an official post in the US, where you see him disheveled and unshaved and a little bit sweaty and stirred in 1983 when he served in DC as a deputy to the ambassador and was caught off guard one night after an incident in Lebanon between American and Israeli troops. And this was an appearance that Netanyahu understood that he cannot appear like this again on TV. But it did happen one time, and we have it on footage. And the other footage was when he, for anyone who saw the film, probably remembers his story about the grizzly bear, where he falters, where he makes a few takes, and then he gets it right. So I felt when I saw this footage, it was this moment in the film, every film you make, that it goes from an idea to a thing that you feel you can actually make. This was a moment when I said, okay, now we can go and make this film. It's not just something I imagine, it's something I can show to the spectators. And then and this was of course part of a very long journey of getting the footage. I think we visited in person or online something like we're using something like 60 or 70 different sources of archives, the documentary. So it was a lot of footwork, getting this archive, looking for going to some archive in the suburbs of Tel Aviv, looking for the box that nothing is written on it, getting the video cassettes, finding the machine that no one uses anymore, and getting the footage that is more interesting, that is not something that you used to see on the news. And the other challenge was how to use the footage that is more known or very known, and to edit it in an interesting way that will be dramatic and engaging enough. So this was a big challenge for us professionally. Usually when you go into the editing room, you have interviews, you have scenes, you have things to work with, and you start putting it together. And here it was really building everything from scratch. So it was a lot of footwork, and then a lot of questions that rise when you edit any film, but the film with such a delicate and toxic connotations to its subject. So for one instance, you think, do I want to edit it thematically? Do I want to say, let's talk about the different topics and then use footage from today and earlier days? Or do I want to edit it chronologically, to take you on a journey from the day Bibi appears on TV and throughout his life? And this is what I chose at the end of the day, because there was something interesting for me to see the change on Netanyahu's face from his early days as a young man in the US or in general, and to see it gradually changing. By the way, I didn't mention before, another thing that was very intriguing for me from the beginning was Netanyahu's American roots. I mean, I always had vague knowledge that he spent a lot of time in the US, But only after starting the research, I realized that how important the US and American culture, American politics, how formative they were for Netanyahu. He didn't just spend a few years in the US. Until the age of 40, he practically spent half of his life in the US. When Ben Zion Netanyahu's father, gave an interview to Haaretz, a newspaper, in 1999, and he was asked about his son's disadvantages as a prime minister. One of the things he said that he wish his Hebrew would be as good as his English, which is kind of an amazing thing to say about Israel's, the Hebrew nation, most prominent prime minister of our time. So that was another subject that was very interesting for me to explore. Apart from gathering the footage, I was doing a lot of just traditional research to understand the story, regardless of what I can tell. So I went to the US, I went to Cheltenham, where Bibi went to high school, met one of his teachers who were very young at the time, met some of his classmates, continued to DC, met people who knew him back in the 80s, where he was a young diplomat, and really trying to understand how this how his American biography affected his roots and his success. Another thing I wanted to show in the film, and another reason I chose to tell it in a chronological order, was what has happened to Israel in these 4 decades that Bibi is in public life. How did Israel change? How did Israeli media change? Again, this is a personal thing for me, because when I first saw Netanyahu on TV, I was a young child. And then I was a teenager in the 90s, and there were so many memorable moments that really followed my life. So that was another story I wanted to tell while making the story. And then while working, it was evident, because of the concept that we chose, that the main theme of the film will be the media, that this will be the focus of the film. And although we'll tell other aspects of Netanyahu's life and politics, we will focus on this. And this will help us kind of create a frame for the documentary, because you can easily do a series of 6 hours about Netanyahu, his family, his politics. But we wanted to get to focus on one theme that will echo through the film. And this, I think, paid off, because when I started working on the documentary, Netanyahu was a prominent figure, but then there was the 2015 election, which kind of were a pivotal moment in the sense that they changed Netanyahu's path from a more statehood manner to a more populist and partisan leadership. And then there was the election of Trump that kind of echoed a lot of things that Netanyahu did. It kind of, I think it even changed Netanyahu in a way. And it put Netanyahu in a new context of the populist leader, similar to Trump, similar to Orban in Hungary, similar to other leaders that became very popular in the last decade. But Bibi was kind of the first man to use this method. This is something that this was one of my main understandings from working on the film. And it was amazing to see, again, as someone who doesn't agree with his politics, it was amazing to understand how he was always ahead of his time in terms of doing what he's doing. And it was interesting to me. So after a longer process of editing. The documentary was ready at the summer of 2018. It premiered in the International Jerusalem Film Festival. And a few months later, it started its cinema round and was broadcast on TV. I didn't really know what to expect when the film was released. You work in this dark room with a few people for many years on a subject that you know will interest a lot of people, but you really don't know what to expect when you release such a film. But I was hoping, I mean, and that's why I made the film the way I made it, that it will speak to that it will be bipartisan in a way, that it can communicate with both people from the left and people from the right, and that everyone will see their own story in a way in this documentary. And this kind of happened, thankfully. The film got a lot of recognition in Israel, and many people viewed it. Usually, we kind of live in this documentary ghetto. You make films for people for a certain kind of crowd, and luckily this film kind of broke the circles and brought more people to see the film. And there were very interesting screenings in Israel for different crowds, or sometimes combined crowds together. That everyone saw a different picture. One of the first screenings were in Herzliya, in a suburb of Israel, that close to a suburb of Tel Aviv, sorry. And when the screening ended, one of the guys sitting in the front rows raised his hand and he said, "You failed." And I was asking, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I came here with my son. I was looking forward to, not looking forward, but I was expecting to see something that will bash Netanyahu, that will show how evil he is. And I'm a Netanyahu supporter. And now I just like him even more." And before he finished his sentence, he heard there was one woman calling from the back of the cinema saying, "Are you crazy? Can't you see he's a psychopath? Can't you see he's ruining Israel?" So this was an interesting experience that reoccurred while showing the film, and it was a very interesting experience for me. And then there was, of course, there was a reaction from Netanyahu himself to the film, and a lot of other reactions to it. So this was nice. The film was, as I said, released about 2 years ago. Not much. I mean, in January 2019, when we started showing the film in cinemas, the first round of elections were declared of April 2019. So, and I felt we were kind of lucky to have this film during an election season, because it will have a lot of attention. I really didn't imagine at all that this season will last 2 years and 4 elections that will keep the film relevant. In a way, fortunate for us and less fortunate for Israel, that is going through this turbulent political era. So yeah, I kind of it's been an interesting ride, showing the film a lot, talking a lot about it, getting a lot of reactions to it, and seeing how it maintains a dialogue with reality, that it keeps changing. And I remember in the first election there was kind of a common knowledge among a lot of journalists and commentators that this is really Netanyahu approaching his end with the criminal investigations, etc. And it's like it happened so many times before in his political life, he defied expectations. He's still around, and I expect him to still be around after the election next week. Um, so, I mean, I could go on talking, but this is in a nutshell, the story of the making the documentary.
Thank you, Dan. That was a great introduction, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions and comments. First of all, thank you for making such a wonderful documentary, so informative and thought-provoking. Before we start our conversation, you mentioned that you never personally voted for Netanyahu. So does that
I,
mean that you are um, not a fan of his?
I'm not a fan of his. No, I'm not a fan of his.
So how did you remain objective? Did you try to maintain objectivity in your film despite your personal views of him?
Yeah, well, I think objectivity is a bit of a big word. I think when you make a film, you need to tell your own story and what you want to say. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so interesting. So I don't believe any film can be really objective, but I wanted to be fair. Like I said, I wanted to avoid the toxic conversation that we're having here in Israel, and I wanted to tell the story in a different way. It was very, very difficult. It was very difficult for me as someone who comes with a certain view on the man to make it something more balanced and more open. The first drafts of the film that we made were very portraying Netanyahu as this cynical liar politician. And then I looked at it, and before even asking myself if it's true or not true, I asked myself, is it interesting to look at such a documentary that gives you one side of the story? And it didn't feel interesting. I think every film you make, whether documentary or not documentary, about a protagonist, you want it to be interesting, you want it to be around, you want it to have different aspects. So it was a challenge for me and it was actually a decision. I want to start in a more empathic way. I want him to talk about his brother in the beginning. I want the viewers to be able to connect to him. And this had an interesting effect where a lot of leftists came to me after seeing it, and they were like confused, and they were like, wow, I kind of liked him at the beginning of the film. This was a strange feeling. I never felt this thing before. Of course, in my opinion, this changes over the years because I think he changes over the years. But it was a tough challenge, and I'm happy I took it on because it was interesting for me.
Let me ask you, now that you've made the film, has your view of Netanyahu shifted for the better or for the worse as a result of the work on the film?
I think both in a way. It's opened my mind in many ways. Working on the film, seeing a lot of, learning a lot of things about Netanyahu, where I was used to prejudge him, and understanding that in a way he was targeted by the media from an early stage, and understanding a lot of things about his voters that I didn't understand before. That why they're voting for him. So and understanding the depth of his talent and knowledge. So on one hand, I gained more respect for him. On the other hand, knowing, understanding how capable he is and how talented he is, and seeing what he's doing in Israeli politics, in my opinion, it just heightened the tragedy for me, because I feel that with his capabilities, he could have done great things for Israel, and I don't think he's doing it at the moment. So it's both answers are right. Yeah.
You mentioned that Netanyahu reacted to the film. What was his reaction?
Well, he watched just a few months after the film was released. He watched it on a plane on the way to Chad. He was traveling to Africa, and I was asked by his team to get the file of the film so he can watch it on the plane. So I sent it to them, and there was a reporter on the plane that took his reaction. So he said that it was an interesting film, that he fell asleep in the middle, but not because the film was not good, but because he was very tired. And he said that he only met Lillian Wilder, the speech instructor from the film, once, and that she told him to always say the truth. And he said that it's not true what the film shows, that he controls the crowd through witchcraft and magic, but thanks to his genius economic action that turned Israel from a backward socialist country to an advanced free market state. So it was an interesting reaction, very Netanyahu, somehow respectful, somehow humiliating, somehow like everything together. But it was interesting to get this reaction because it meant to me that the film is important enough that he will react to it. There was another reaction about 6 months after, when the film was first broadcast on ESTV, which is a cable network, and then it was purchased by one of the broadcasters in Israel, and it was broadcast there again. And then Netanyahu tweeted something more against the film, something about why do the creators of King Bibi, why didn't they show from the Rabin era of the film, why didn't they show that I said that Rabin is not a traitor, etc. So these
why
were.
Why didn't you show that? In other words, in one of the when the crowd was chanting Boged, that he's a traitor, Rabin, he told the crowd he's not a traitor, he's just mistaken. Why did you choose to leave that out of the film?
Because I didn't feel it was. I mean, he said that on that occasion. He said that on one other occasion. But other right-wing politicians that came to this demonstration in Jerusalem just a week before Rabin was assassinated, they left the demonstration because it wasn't just about the words; it was about the atmosphere in the crowd and things that were chanted. So I didn't feel it was a crucial thing to how Bibi, how he behaved in this era. I am showing his reaction just after the assassination, so I do think the accounts in the film are balanced. But I think with Netanyahu, it's interesting because it's a lot about what he doesn't say. It's not just about what he says. So I think sometimes even if your words say something, people can take it to other places, like it happened back then. I don't think that like other people think that he's to blame for the murder. I mean, I don't think, and I definitely don't think that he benefited from it. But there was a certain environment at the time, and at the end, I think he did more to encourage it than to discourage it. Again, I think he was acting from his political reasons, but I think at the end of the day, how I portrayed it was a balanced account and the right account.
If you did have an opportunity to sit down with Bibi today and ask him questions like unfinished business from the film, what were some of the questions maybe you would pose to him?
Wow, there'll be so many. I think I'll be first of all interested a lot about his family, his relationship with his father, how he sees himself. Actually, a lot of things that are not in the film, because the film, because of its concept, I knew there were certain depths that I cannot go into. And there's something about making a documentary about a prime minister that is still in office, that there are some things that I think there's another film to make about Netanyahu after, if it will ever happen, he will stop being prime minister, that can be told from a certain perspective. But I think I will ask him, I'd like to know more about his personal life that you don't see so much in the media.
what do you think Bibi is more popular in Israel or in America? Talking
So
about it to the Jewish people.
I think it's a good question. I think I don't I don't know. What do you think?
Well, we don't know the politics of Israel, but we see him as a very courageous leader who wasn't afraid to stand up when it came to the Iran deal. He stood up in Congress. He spoke strongly. We like to see a leader who defends Israel in the world. The world is so anti-Israel, and the UN,
Yeah,
obviously, as portrayed in the film. And when he was in the halls of the UN or whether in the halls of Congress, he was not afraid to speak like a proud Jew and defend Israel and Israel's right. And so that's I think many Jews, and I know when he comes to APAC, and I go to APAC every year, when he speaks, the audience just loves him. They also because of his orating skills as well, but they just love him. There's this celebrity status around him because of his charisma, but also because they feel Israel needs a strong, powerful leader to stand up to the forces that are anti-Israel in the world. So I don't know if Israelis appreciate that. Do Israelis appreciate that he's an advocate, a spokesperson? The Iran deal, I'm imagining most of the Israeli public is not in favor of the Iran deal. So he's a vocal voice against that deal.
yes, yes. Although you ask yourself whether it was the right thing to oppose this deal and where did it get us in terms of Iran and its nuclear possibilities. It's a difficult question. I don't know how to answer it. Of course, a lot of Israelis like him for these reasons. Exactly, they feel it's not only what you say, but it's also the way he represents Israelis outside of Israel. But what you're portraying in APAC is scenes that you can see. I mean, this is one footage that I couldn't get in, but his farewell from APAC in 1988, when he stops being the ambassador to the UN, is pretty amazing. There's a lot of energy there. You already see this energy that you're talking about, and the text as well. I think he understands his role as someone who represents Jews in the US and around the world. Of course, it, things are getting more and more divided. I think a lot of American Jews now feel that he doesn't represent them. So I think the question in Israel is kind of like the question in the US, and in Israel, the question of his popularity is interesting because Netanyahu is very popular among his supporters, but he's not a very popular leader. I think a lot of his strength comes from understanding the Israeli politics and his ability to kind of talk to different crowds. I don't know. Sometimes I don't feel that he's loved. Definitely not by his political allies like Sharon was loved or Begin was loved. It's kind of a different kind of thing. But what you're asking is interesting because, like I said before, this was one of my first motivations to make the film, seeing how he's being admired in the U.S. not only by Jews but also by other publics
a lot of
as well.
Christians respect.
Yeah, a lot of Christians and a lot of and I felt that maybe sometimes he doesn't get respect in Israel, and it was interesting for me to.
By the way, if anyone has questions, please type them into the chat box so we can present your questions. Let me ask you: is he given credit for bringing an end to the terrorism that followed the Oslo Accords? The fact that now Israel enjoys a certain level of security with the wall and everything else?
I think so. I think at the end of the day, this is the secret of his success. At the end of the day, that he brought a certain stability to Israel, and I'm mentioning it by the end of the film. At the end, this is the story. He knows. He's even. I mean, it's not so much about his ideology. He's a very cautious leader. He's not rushing into war, maybe because of his ideology. He doesn't need to prove himself as certain leaders from the left. So I think even if not everyone admits it, he's definitely being given credit for it, because Israelis in general, they feel more secure. Although you ask yourself, never mind. Yeah.
In Israel, there's no term limits, which means theoretically he could just go on indefinitely forever. Not
Yeah,
forever,
it seems
but
like this is his plan. Yeah, there's no. I mean, yeah, he can go on forever. And it seems like it's not just about the terms. It seems like he wants it more than anyone else. You see him now in the elections. He's doing like 8 events a day. The guy is over 70. He's not tiring. There's a lot of energy there.
I know this is not part of the film, but in Israel, how is he seen as having managed the coronavirus? Is his approval favorable in that area?
I think he's getting a lot of credit for the vaccines that is allowing us to go back to life now. But the death ratio here was pretty high, and I think a lot of people feel that the corona was used politically, both to gain some political advantages and to. I felt as someone, I actually traveled with my family to the US a couple of months ago. It was an interesting journey during a pandemic. And you see that the restrictions in Israel are much harder. So what I feel is it's again, it's very Netanyahu. It's like doing being very smart and understanding that the vaccines are important and fighting to get it. And then on the other hand, letting many people die, using very extreme measures to keep the lockdown, being favorable to some political groups that he's dependent on, and not. I don't think a lot of people in Israel are feeling that there is that the politics is fair, that everyone are treated the same way at the moment. So I think it exposed a lot of tension, but it showed him as the more experienced leader again. So another complicated question with a complicated answer.
Is he given a lot of credit for the new Abraham Accords? And Israelis very happy with that development?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I think people appreciate it.
And is he seen as a visionary for having gone out of the box of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to reach out to nurture relationships with the other Gulf states?
Yeah, it's not only that. It's proving that his idea was right from the beginning. That you can get peace if you don't cave in. But this doesn't really. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. Maybe it's the way to go, but it doesn't solve the Palestinian issue. Of course, I mean there are still millions of people living under brutal occupation right here. So maybe it will help it in the future. I don't know how, but.
And you think he's going to win the election next week?
I think so. Yeah.
By a landslide or just by a little bit?
No, there's no landslide. He never won by a landslide. He cannot win by a landslide because there's many people who oppose him. But he knows how to play the game better than anyone else, and you just don't see prominent enough leaders that will oppose him. And perhaps there isn't a prominent a strong idea that will oppose him as well. There's no one there's no one powerful enough to stand against him. You had the closest thing was Gantz 2 years ago, but Gantz was kind of another product of our era. We didn't know anything about him. He was like kind of a puppeteer. Later we found out. So I think most chances that he will find a way to remain in power next week.
Is most of the media still against him today?
I think on the contrary, I think he enjoys this notion because I think he profits from it politically. So he seeks the confrontation with the media because it has a good effect for him. He has a lot of power in the media now. He has Israel Hayom, the newspaper that Sheldon Adelson founded, is the most distributed newspaper. It's really kind of a propaganda newspaper in many aspects. He has many people in the major media outlets that are in favor of him. So I think this thing might have been true in the past, and I show it in the film as well, and it was interesting for me to discover. But I think it's not true anymore, especially because of social media. That's really something that he, again, envisioned and understood from an early age, but this really allows him to speak directly to his people, and he doesn't need the mainstream media anymore. But I think, again, the notion of the media against him is something that is comfortable for him to maintain. It's something that helps him at the end.
Someone asked the question, I'm just reading the question, what agreement does Bibi have with his third wife after his infidelity, and why is she not loved?
We don't know what agreement they have, or if they have an agreement. There was a big controversy now in Israel about a certain man that was interviewed and showed on video saying that he saw this agreement, that this agreement allows Sarah Netanyahu to, it gives her the power to approve important appointments of head of Mossad and Shabak, etc. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't think it matters so much. I think the obsession with Sarah is kind of, I don't know what it helps. I think, Netanyahu is a grown man. He's responsible for his actions. We need to judge him as a prime minister, not his personal life. And you can see, I mean, it's evident that she has some issues, and I think a lot of I think the whole criminal issues that Netanyahu has now are kind of coming from her and his house. I think the way they are acting, the respect they are seeking, the economical benefits they're asking, it creates a lot of I don't know, discontent, and it creates a lot of a lot of noise around the prime minister house and office. I don't think it helps him, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. But basically, all the indictments that are standing against Netanyahu now, they started from his surroundings. They didn't really start from him personally. So.
Right. Someone here in the question said that he has a nephew in the IDF, and he was talking to his nephew, and his nephew said that he personally doesn't like Netanyahu's politics, but as a soldier, if he has to go to war, there's no one he would want better as the prime minister, as a soldier on the battlefield than Netanyahu. Does that statement resonate with you?
I think the problem for me with Netanyahu is that he's been around so long that people cannot imagine any other reality. And if I mean, young soldiers, they grew up in an era where that's the only prime minister they know. I remember, and I show in the film, one of my favorite footage was Bibi standing next to Reagan and Yitzhak Shamir. And you think of Yitzhak Shamir as a very, very, very different kind of politician. And you think of an era where prime ministers were not kings, where they were just prime ministers who did their job, finished their job, replaced by someone else. So I don't agree with this. I think there are other leaders and prime ministers potentially that could make soldiers feel just as comfortable and motivated. But for me, this is part of a certain personality cult that evolved around Netanyahu, which is both to left and right. I mean, it makes, I mean, people who oppose him are part of this propaganda because, like you maybe hinted before, they will not give him credit for the Abraham Accords or for good things he's done. And then people from the right will think that he's the only man who can do these things. I don't agree with it from both sides.
Right. Are there any traits or qualities of Netanyahu that you admire?
He's clearly a very, very intelligent human being and knowledgeable. And like I said before, I think there's something cautious about him. I think he cares for human life, at least for Jewish human life. So that's why he's not rushing to wars, and that's why maybe this is even his greatest quality. I think he's cautious for human life.
Let me ask you, you chose to name the movie King Bibi. Were there other titles that you were considering that King Bibi won out to? Were there any other titles you were considering? And is the term King Bibi meant to be a little bit derogatory, that he's a cultish type of a leader?
Yeah, well, I took the title from the Time cover from 2012, where they portrayed him as King Bibi, and this kind of stuck with me, this idea. It's both derogatory and complimenting, like the film is, and people take it in different ways. So yeah, I think it's complimenting him for being such a success story. And then it's a question: do you want a king as your leader, or do you want just a prime minister? So this is again takes you to each one is personal views. Personally, I wouldn't like a king as a prime minister. But
you mentioned earlier that what did we gain from his going into the halls of Congress and speaking out against the Iran nuclear deal? But as a result of all the pressure he put on, as you showed in the film, after Netanyahu revealed all of the materials that they got out of Iran, the Mossad was able to go in and receive all these documents. Right after that, President Trump announced that as a result of that, he was going to withdraw from the nuclear Iran deal. Is that something Israelis are happy with, that America, at the moment at least, is out of the Iran deal?
I think so. I think the general notion is to oppose the deal, but I don't know if it's. For me, the question is: 3 years later, is Iran closer to a nuclear weapon, and is it more prominent in Syria and in the Middle East? I mean, what did it change? Is the situation better now? I'm not sure.
What I know, this is not about Bibi, but Bibi stood up against the Oslo Accords.
Yeah.
And what is the view now in hindsight, looking back at the Oslo Accords, at the work of Shimon Peres, Yitzhak Rabin, and the left in Israel that was pushing that peace agreement? Is there any perspective now, looking back, that that was a mistake? A tragic
mistake? It depends who you ask. Are you asking me?
I'm asking you, but I want to know what the consent. Is there a consensus in Israel?
There's no consensus now in Israel about anything. It's really very divided about all kinds of about everything. I think the Oslo Accords is a complicated it's a complicated question. There were, of course, there was a lot of mistakes done there. On one hand, on the other hand, no one really. I mean, Bibi, with all these years in power, we never dismantled it. I mean, it was. I think it's a comfortable concept for Israelis in general to have someone who's responsible for the Palestinian. I mean, the Palestinian Authority was created in the Oslo Accords, and I think Netanyahu doesn't want it to cease to exist. So, and the idea of normal. I mean, the peace agreements that Netanyahu is so proud about them now, it started then. The idea of normalization with Arab countries started then. Peace with Morocco started then. Visits to Qatar, all the things that we see today, it started then. So I think the Oslo Accord, even if it created a lot of sorrow, it also changed something that that we're benefiting from today as well.
If we could go a little bit into former President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu, they enjoyed a very good relationship, and you touch upon the comparisons. In what ways would you say the two men are similar, and which ways would you say they're different?
I think they're similar in many ways, in their approach, in their relationship with the media. When I was looking at the signs from Bibi's win in 1996, holding you see like people in the crowd holding signs against the media. So this really reminded me Trump rallies from 2016. They kind of fierce approach to things. They have a lot of similarities and in their populist approach. But the differences, I think, is Netanyahu is much more intellectual and much more careful. Netanyahu is more, he knows how to compromise sometimes to get his goals. I think that Trump is less a refined politician in that aspect.
I remember there were a lot of demonstrations at one point about Netanyahu with the price of cottage cheese, for example.
At
the price of cottage.
Yeah.
Have those economic issues been resolved, or are they still a issue in the election?
I don't know how much they're an issue in the election, but they won't resolve at all. Israel is one of the most expensive places in the world. It's practically impossible for young people to buy a house here. Everything, you go to the supermarket, everything is terribly, terribly expensive and not related to what you earn here. So this kind of, I mean, Netanyahu is very proud of his economics, but these kind of things are only deteriorating here. So it's still an issue, you know. It's always in Israel, the economic issue is never the main issue. So.
Could you touch a little bit about his son? His son seems to be a little outspoken. And does he have any political ambitions? And it doesn't sound like he has any chance for succeeding his father in politics in any way. But
I wouldn't completely bet against him. I think his son is important in Netanyahu's reign. His son is actually responsible for a lot of Netanyahu's handling of the new media, Facebook, Twitter, etc. He really understands this. He connected him to his friends who are operating this one for Bibi now, and he's very involved. From what I know, his public figure is more arrogant, more straightforward, and he really represents the new era, the new generation. I think, yeah, he's an interesting figure to watch. Not pleasant for me many times, but an interesting figure, and I think he really represents the new politics.
Have you started working on your next film yet?
Yes, yes. There's a few projects in the making. Right now, I'm editing a film about uh, Amos Dov Silver, who grew up in an Orthodox community in the Tzfat, and then became the biggest drug lord in Israel.
Hmm. And that's your next film?
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully,
When is it
can
due out?
by the end of the year, I hope.
Okay. On a final note, the last year in Israel for Pesach, everyone was in total lockdown, shutdown. What is Pesach in Israel going to look like this year? Will families be sitting together at the Lil Seder this year?
Yeah, yeah. Israel, everything here is from from 0 to 100. So you don't just open up gradually. Since we opened up about a few weeks ago, the streets are full, the restaurants are full. Everything is crazy, and I'm sure people will have a happy Passover with their families.
Are
Most
people
people,
wearing masks indoors still?
they never will. Oh, like in people still wear masks indoors, but not when they dine or not when they drink. So
And how is the infection rate in Israel right now?
I haven't checked the last numbers, but I think it's good. I think the vaccines are working.
So I'm assuming you already got your vaccinations.
Yeah. The minute I could.
Very nice.
Yeah. No,
Well,
anyone who wanted it could get it in Israel.
right. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for this very interesting film and discussion. Um,
Thank you.
Someone asked the last comment, did you see the show Oslo in New York at Lincoln Center?
No, I missed it unfortunately. I think they're turning it into a film or something. So hopefully I will
Well,
see it. Is it good?
she said it's awesome.
Okay, so check
She
it
said
out.
it's awesome. Thank you very much.
When Broadway will be back.
I'm bored to be back.
Wait,
Thank you so
yeah.
much. This was a great film and a great conversation. Whoever's
Thank you.
not see it yet, I encourage everyone to watch it. And Shabbat Shalom and Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. Have a great holiday, great Passover, and take
Toda
care.
Rabah. Toda Rabah. And thank you so much for coming on. I know it's like, what, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. I'm going back to bed now.
We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Bye bye.
Hope, bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.